rudimentary sense of life or death, good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face, with blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Let's Talk Movies. I'm Brad.
Good morning. I'm Miguel.
And it's not morning, you idiot.
Feels like morning to me, dog.
I'm kidding. Listen, it's been a while since we had a Sunday show. It's been a long time. But it's kind of cool coming to you from the middle of the day. Happy Sunday. Happy weekend. Hope you've been having a good one. This is episode number 23 of Purely and Simply Evil, a Let's Talk Movies podcast. And I almost said tonight, but it's not tonight. Whatever time of day it is. Our journey into taking a deep old dive into horror continues with A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child. This is kind of an interesting crossroad in the Elm Street journey here, because we've made it through the first 4 films. Mm-hmm. They were really, really strong. And this is where a lot of people would say that it starts to kind of go downhill and diminish. We really only have 2 more, including this one. If you exclude this one, we only have 1 more of the original sequels left in the Elm Street franchise.
Until we get to the whole meta version of
and until we get to Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and then of course the remake. This is really it. 5 and 6 are kind of what a lot of people would say is like the decline. Like, we've hit the peak of the franchise, and now the roller coaster starting to head back to its final destination. You know?
Yeah, so I'd say that. But I mean, okay, granted, story-wise, it really does go on a decline. But I don't know. It just seems it seems just as fun as all the other ones.
It is, and I think that's part of what makes it so charming too. Is it's so there's something. I was thinking about this earlier today, actually. There's something charming about the franchise, even at its worst. There's something so cool about Freddy and about what happened with just kind of what happened with him as an icon and kind of the 80s figure that he became within pop culture. It's kind of cool, and it's kind of interesting and weird to see that play out, and we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit more too. They wanted to return to kind of a more serious vibe and feel with this film, even though there's some
they
moments
wanted this to be serious. Yeah, that's funny. No.
There's some moments in this movie that are pretty funny, you know. It's weird. It's strange to look at as a whole, those little differences of Freddy in each film. And I mean, we're about to take a big old deep dive into this thing. So
take a big old deep shit into this pile.
Hunter Iggy's in the chat. What's going on, man? Let's talk movies. What's up? What's going on, man? What's going on, man? I hope you're having a good weekend.
It's not even the night. He's not even tired.
It's not even the night, and I haven't even been drinking. All I'm drinking is tea. Although I'm drinking it in my old smoky moonshine mug.
That's someone that's
but it's not spiked, I promise.
Off the wagon. I'm kidding. Respect all y'all.
No, it's not spiked. I did debate a little bit of day drinking, but I decided against it. It's probably not good for health.
I'm glad. You know,
that makes me sound like an alcoholic.
Even in the 20s, we have some morals about our health.
We do. There's a line there, and you can't cross it. So let's not waste any time. Let's go ahead and hop into Elm Street 5.
Okay.
So April 11th, 1989, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 released, directed by Stephen Hopkins, who also did Predator 2. He did Lost in Space, the 1998 version, The Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas from 1996. Written by, are you ready? Four different people. Well, really, a whole different slew of people, and that's another thing about
an absolute slew of different people. This thing went through writing hell, if that makes sense. Right?
It did, but it was almost purposely done that way, and we'll get to that in just a minute. So, written by Leslie Boehm, who contributed to Jason Goes to Hell, John Skipp, who he had written a whole slew of books and movies and music and all kinds of stuff. I mean, if you look at John Skipp's Wikipedia page, you'll be like, holy crap, man. David Show and Craig Spector. So it's really contributed as 4 main writers, although it's interesting, the Writers Guild of America actually had to step in at one point and dictate who gets the writing credits for the story in the credits because of how many different drafts of this story there were. And that's part of the reason that the story gets kind of nuts, because there were so many changes and alterations made during pre-production. It almost feels, and I don't know if anybody else would agree with me, but it almost feels like there were far too many ideas for the Elm Street franchise to handle. Like, if we always talk about Halloween as having so many unmade sequels, and I actually have Taking Shape right back here. But if you read the second Taking Shape book, it's all about the unmade Halloween sequels and all about the unmade Halloween films. I feel like Elm Street might be able to double that, honestly, with the different
in regards to like
ideas
how many like iterations they're like.
Well, what they wanted to do.
That they want.
Yeah. So when we kind of talk about the weird, chaotic group of ideas that are kind of thrown together for especially this film, but even for the next film, which
I can't wait, guys. I really can't.
Have you ever seen Freddy's Dead?
I've not seen it.
Oh boy, you're in for it, my friend. If
it's just as wacky as this one, I mean,
it's my least favorite in the original franchise.
Is it? Oh well, in that case, by making some content, this would be my favorite. There we go.
It just decided to go nuts. Like, and they knew it. Like, that was the point. You know, that was the point.
To this?
Yes, compared to this.
Bro, like, listen to the fucking synopsis. It's like Alice literally suspects that Freddy's using the fetus that she has as a way of killing her friends.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. So yeah, if it gets crazier than that, I can't wait. Because I want you guys to know, like, as someone that's like new to all this, like, older 80s horror, like, I'm excited to see how wacky this shit gets. I know it's not primarily 80s, but like, you know, in the older generation of horror, or like I guess you could say, is this the Renaissance of horror? I don't know, but
yeah,
I guess the golden age of horror. Like, this is, the more wacky it gets, the more I enjoy it. I'm not gonna lie, because at this point,
this was,
like, I'm here to have some fun now.
Granted, this was at the tail end of the I mean, this was 1989, so this was obviously the end of the 80s craze, and I know it did kind of extend into the 90s as well. But this was kind of that's an interesting concept in and of itself too, because not only had Freddy kind of hit his peak, but the horror craze had kind of started to hit its peak, and it was starting to do some weird, strange things.
Like, everything had to go to space.
Yeah, I don't like. Weird.
Yeah, I feel like that didn't. That even I noticed that.
When did Jason X come out? Jason X didn't come out until 2001, so that was still 11, 20. What? No, not 20. I don't know why I said 20. 12 years later? Jason
but you get what I'm saying. Like, everything just needed to be like, they just had to up the ante, I guess, in regards to horror. It was no longer like small, like, I guess not small, but like, you know, the writing kind of makes sense in regards to like how the story should go, in regards to like what these horror icons can do. And then next thing you know, we just put them somewhere completely left field and just like, here we go, here's another movie.
Right. Another piece of the puzzle with this, the crazy stuff with the writers and this group of people that just kind of threw ideas and saw what stuck, was that, as we just said, 80s horror had kind of started to hit its peak, and there was this little mini movement within it called the splatterpunk movement. And really, I've seen it a lot in reference to horror literature, but I think it applies to movies as well. You could almost trace that movement when you look at the types of films that were coming out from 1995 to 1990-ish, or 1985 to 1995. Like think Return of the Living Dead, think Hellraiser, Evil Dead 2, like films that are overly gothic, overly gory, overly almost sexual and comical in a way, like just very over the top rock and roll glamorized horror movies that were very violent and graphic rock and roll punk rock like gothic stories, and that was totally unique to the 80s. Like that was something that it's one of the things that makes me love 80s horror so much, because there's so much going on and it's just a wild genre with wild people and wild stories, and it's the kind of thing that you could have never gotten away with in any other decade.
And what was the name you're labeling it?
Splatterpunk.
Splatterpunk.
Splatterpunk. Yeah,
Splatterpunk. Huh. Well, I gotta say, I could agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, honestly, with the way movies have been going around that time, I mean, I can say like rock was like really like hitting the stage too, and I don't know. I guess there was more of like a rebellious generation, right? Too in the 80s. Still, they were still like that hardcore like rock rebellious age, you know. Yeah. But I guess I could kind of see the decade or the era that this movie was being put in, because you know this movie doesn't seem like it fits, you know, the era of like the 2000s or 2010s or the 70s. It doesn't fit any of that. It's like, you know, that it primarily fits on, you know, the 1980s and at the tail end of the 1980s. Right. So F that. Yeah. I like that Splatterpunk.
Well, and kind of even going back to the horror writer thing, they even talked about this in Never Sleep Again, which I actually just rewatched last night. When Elm Street 5 was in pre-production, and something that was kind of common with the splatterpunk thing, which they had mentioned on there, there was something that a lot of studios did where they would basically contact every single writer that was doing that kind of thing in horror at the time. And New Line was like, hey, throw us your pitch. Where does Freddy go next? What you got? Where does he go? What do we do? You know? And of course, it ended up David Show, who went on to write The Crow. He went on to write Texas Chainsaw 3, Leatherface. He wrote the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning. He had pitched them a script called Freddy Rules, where there was this middle ground between the dream world and a reality called the Coma Pit, described as like he described it like a swirling vortex type thing. Where it was basically the one place
like
that Freddy was
purgatory.
Kind of, it was like the one place in between the dream world and the real world where Freddy was afraid of. It was like you could actually fight him in this coma pit thing.
That's called REM sleep.
Yeah, like that was very interesting, but I could also see why that would be a logistical nightmare. Like that wouldn't be a very simple thing to film at all.
Yeah, you couldn't.
That would be difficult.
You couldn't explain that in just one exposition. You know what I mean? Because you know how everything had to be like the stage had to be set with like one exposition or one monologue, and for that to be accomplished in just like, you know, one scene or two, pretty far fetched if you ask me.
I was even thinking more logistically in terms of like CGI was not very advanced. I mean, we saw that at the end of this movie with the spiders when they tear Freddy apart, the 1,000 Maniacs or whatever, and of course he comes right back. But when he turns into the spiders, it's the worst CGI spiders you've ever seen in your entire life. Look at what happened in Freddy's Dead. Like the technology, it was there, and it could be done well, but it wasn't done well, you know.
Yeah.
So
the ideas were ahead of their time of the technology.
Yeah, logistically having to create that whole vortex in between worlds, it wouldn't work. It would have been too much. And it's kind of like the end of this film. Like we'll get to the end, but like what is the end of this movie supposed to be? Like it doesn't quite make sense. I've always had an issue with the last 15-20 minutes of this film just not making any sense at all. But the actual story of A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5 dates back to the days of Dream Warriors, and we've talked about this before if you go back and watch our other episode. Leslie Boehm pitched the idea to Bob Shea and Sarah Risher about this essentially a pregnant woman, and Freddy is haunting the unborn child's dreams, and Freddy is clawing his way out of her belly and things like that. And Sarah Risher was pregnant at the time, and that made her, rightfully so, super uncomfortable. And she was like, that ain't happening, nope. And he got a call, Leslie Baum did, when part 5 was in development, and they were like, yeah, we kind of want to do that now. That sounds dope. So I guess it's funny because she went from being so creeped out by the idea that New Line shut it down, fell flat on its face. But then she actually, again, in Never Sleep Again, she was like, I wanted to portray the themes of like abortion, childbirth, sex, motherhood, those types of things. So it's kind of, that's an odd, it's kind of an odd thing, but
and I don't know.
It's a cool idea.
Do you sense that in this movie? Because I don't know. I just sense,
a little bit. Yeah, they touched on it a little bit. If you think about the whole Dan's parents thing, and even mental health was kind of touched on with this, because when Dan's parents, her boyfriend, when they try to come by and they're like, we were wondering it's such a dick move. They're like, we were wondering what you were going to do with the baby. And she's like, I'm keeping it. He's my responsibility. I think that'll be really good for me. And they're like, oh. I'm like, bro, shut up. Like, let her, come on. Like, chill.
The parents were not supportive by any stretch of the bank.
They weren't. And which, granted, their son did just die, and I understand that. But, like, at the same time, like, it's still your grandchild, and it's still your grandchild's mother, so you could try to do a little bit better. But they waltzed up into her dad's house and were like, we want the baby. And then when she said no, they were like, the courts will disagree with you. Like, she's like, what? Like, the Elm Street franchise has a trope of having the worst parents ever in any horror film.
I think every horror movie back then.
None of them top Elm Street.
I know, but you know how like shitty the parents can be. Always. And it's always to the point where it's like, well, I guess now the kid has to like, step up to the plate kind of thing. It's like the child always has to be the grown up in the scenario. So. Yeah. And that's kind of changed, as we've evolved in the movie theaters or movies, because there's more movies out here where the parents aren't actually dipshits and
Although I will say Alice's dad was a big contrast to that, because her dad was a good guy. Like even after she found out she was pregnant, and she was like, "Are you mad?" And he was like, no, he was like, I'm kind of hoping it's a boy. He was trying to be a good dude about it.
Trying to be a supportive, I guess.
A good supportive father. Like he was a good guy. I liked him a lot. And you've also got to remember at this point, Freddy was a pop culture icon, like we've talked about before. Elm Street 4 was the highest grossing entry in the franchise at this point. Freddy's Nightmares was airing. A Nightmare on Elm Street was hot at this point, which meant that an entire decade of kids and teenagers had grown up watching Freddy Krueger do his thing. And these kids were older, and they were having babies, and they were starting families of their own, which is why Sarah Risher was like, it ain't me anymore. Let them be scared of it. So he had become so beloved that Bob Shea and the New Line execs were like, we have got to do something to make him scary again. So this was their attempt at bringing some seriousness back into it, which is why I think you get the mental health themes, the motherhood themes, the abortion kind of thing. Like, not necessarily abortion. They didn't really talk about abortion explicitly. But it was there. I don't know if they did a really great job of lacing it into the plot, but
I think they were just trying to like sprinkle it into the story and
it was just kind of
like, well, that's what we were
there.
trying to do. Yeah, like that was the whole point. That's what we wanted to showcase. But they like made little spots in there, but they're primarily like focus on Freddy. Like Freddy's your main guy.
It's like when you go to Olive Garden and it's like he asks if you want Parmesan cheese, and I mean, of course you want the friggin' Parmesan cheese on top of your of course you do. But it's like he just does like one or two little turns of the thing instead of like cranking that thing.
What Olive Garden have you gone to, man? They were stingy with your stuff then. Jesus. I could stick my nose in it and still not have enough.
Snort it like cocaine. You can never have enough Parmesan cheese. That's just the thing. And another thing, and I don't know if you would agree with me or if anybody else would agree with me, but this film is kind of, for me, it's the Halloween 6 of the Elm Street franchise. It gets weirdly sexual again. It's super heavy metal
Weirdly,
and hardcore.
it's like the first fucking scene.
I know.
I remember when we first turned it on. I think it was like the midday. We was midday around this time we watched it. I think because we did a commentary on it.
We did.
And we were
it hasn't released yet. It'll release next week.
Haven't released it yet. But we watched a commentary. We did it as a commentary. And I remember like it was like fucking like 3:00 in the afternoon, and I'm sitting here in my computer room, and it's just a blue light sex scene, just first 10 minutes of the movie, and I'm like, Brad, we are really watching this together, aren't we?
Yep. Well, and the thing is, it's the most awkward sex scene I've ever seen in a movie. It's like it doesn't even explicitly show, which I mean, it doesn't need to explicitly show anything. That's not what I mean, but like it's just like sweaty back, like grinding up against sweaty body. Like that's all it is.
That was
like
the 80s, man.
Like it's just like blue sweat beads running down somebody, and then you start to see like the tip of an ass crack, and then it goes away, and it goes. We go to a different part of a body. Like it's very awkward.
Yeah.
It's such an awkward scene.
I don't know.
But
it was presented like just a sensual moment, but it's also weird because these are like just graduated like high school kids, and that's just really fucking weird to watch. As
it was like the night before their high school graduation.
It was.
Like literally the night before.
Like explain the level of like uncomfortable that I had during that entire scene. I was like,
yeah,
I wish we could skip through this, but we're doing a commentary and you guys have to follow along.
Yeah, but even the editing and kind of the gore and what they wanted to do, they wanted it to be very, very gory, and of course it was heavily edited to get the R rating from the MPAA because there were several scenes that had to be cut or heavily edited, like Greta's death. Dan's death on the motorcycle, like all of that stuff had to be
and that was still pretty gnarly edited. Too.
And it was. They were both still pretty gnarly. But the MPAA was like, yeah, no, not happening. It's just it's a weird combination of comedy and hardcore, that splatterpunk horror thing going on.
Yeah.
But also still trying to maintain his pop culture status. Like it's weird. Like I think about the theatrical trailer, and if you go back and rewatch the theatrical trailer, it's such a like weird juxtaposition of like, there's one line and it's like his life and death have become one incredible nightmare, which is cool. Like that's a cool dark line. And then it's like, but that's all going to change because now Freddy wants to become a daddy. And it's like
I remember this fucking trailer.
Like it has you going like, ooh, yeah.
It was like that cheesy narration, if that makes sense. You know what I'm talking about? Like
because that Freddy wants to become a daddy.
Yeah.
You got to get Dave McRae to do that thing. And then of course you hear him at the end of the trailer, want to make babies?
Ugh. Well, that's only because
that's the reaction.
It's because Freddy was just again, as popular as he was of an icon back then. Like I mean, he was just there for the fans. He was not there for for anything that had to do with the story. He was just there to show the fans like, hey, I'm back. Wreck some shit and enjoy it. Pretty much. Yeah. Let me turn the tables on you real quick though, because now I want to be a dad.
And I don't know if it was better for it or not. This film didn't do as well, even though it was at the height of its popularity. Financially, it didn't do what they wanted it to do at the box office. It made $22.1 million at the global box office, and compared to the first Elm Street, which made $57 million, way lower.
Yeah.
Elm Street 2 made $30 million. Elm Street 3 made $44.8 million, and Elm Street 4 made $49 billion. So almost. Obviously the first one made the most at $57 million, but 22.1, I mean, that's not even really gaining on it at all,
No.
So it really kind of budget? Like budget. I don't know what the budget was. Let's see. I didn't have that in my notes.
Google.
By the way, SPC Bird, what's going on, Austin?
Hey, buddy. $8 million.
The budget. It was
Did you find $8 million and
$8 million.
Yep.
So it made its it made its money back, but like, did it do what they wanted it to do? No.
Hey, as far as we're concerned, if you make your budget and more, you're making a sequel. It's almost guaranteed. If it makes sense, you know what I mean?
Yeah, Stephen Hopkins has said that he was really disappointed in the final product. Like, he said they had carved it so much that it was a really rough schedule or rushed schedule with a really reasonable budget, and he finished it, and he was kind of happy that they finished it, and he thought, hey, we did a pretty decent job for what we had, And then he was like, New Line came in and the MPAA completely cut everything out of it. And he said what started out as an okay film with a few good bits turned into a total embarrassment. He said he doesn't even watch it anymore at all,
Really?
And I mean, we're talking stuff like Robert Englund said in that documentary, he was like, pretty much every single death scene was way worse than it ended up being. Like Greta's death, the food one where he's stuffing her mouth with the food,
I thought that one was probably like the most uncomfortable one
that one was very uncomfortable, yeah.
Because even though forgot what his name was, the one that turned into a fucking motorcycle. Like his death was with Dan when he got
that was pretty gnarly.
That's pretty gnarly.
That also has the funniest moment in the entire movie for me.
It does.
Which we're gonna get to in a minute. I don't know if we're thinking of the same thing.
I was just thinking of like the scene of like him in the truck, pretty much.
Yeah. But there's a moment though where because Dan's got the champagne because he's gonna go celebrate with Alice or whatever, and he's got the champagne sitting there because when they're at the pool, like somebody goes to open, they're like, let's pop this bad boy open, and he's like, no, that's for me and Alice later. And it's funny because he's sit there driving the truck and he can tell him and Freddy are arguing his mom and Freddy are arguing on the radio and whatever, and he looks over and Freddy's sitting there and Freddy pops the champagne and he chugs the entire thing, and then as soon as he chugs it, he just goes and like spits it all out on the dashboard. And that scene is so funny because it's like, bro, this is the most wild and chaotic Freddy ever.
This really is.
It's so fun. There's something so funny when he spits it out on the dashboard. It just cracks me up every time I see it. And I think he says something. He's like, "That was a bad year, Dan," or something like that. When he holds it. It's so funny. Yeah. But Robert Englund had said like for an example with the MPAA cutting things, Greta's death, when he's kind of shoving the food in her throat and she's getting bigger and stuff, he had actually like stabbed her in the stomach at one point and started re-pulling the food back out and re-shoving it into her mouth. So it was like an endless cycle of like she swallows it and then she eats it again. And the MPAA was like, you're not doing that. Like that's not happening.
Okay,
no.
I think there's one moment where I agree with the MPA. I'm not.
Yeah, you're kind of like, all right, I'm
I
good.
feel like that was a line that definitely didn't.
I'm good. Yeah.
Oh my god, I think I just see the fucking. I found the picture too of what the scene was.
Yeah. Tommy Knocker, what's going on, man? Tommy Knocker, the horror guy, said this was a sign of the times that horror was dying and watered down. I agree. 89 had arguably the worst in the franchise for Elm Street, Friday, Manhattan, and Halloween 5. Yikes. I do agree with you there. Although it's weird. Specifically, Jason Takes Manhattan is a big guilty pleasure for me. And I know every time I say that, people are like, "You're an idiot." I'm like, "Okay." I love Jason Takes Manhattan, and I know it's a god awful movie. It really is. It's like a 1 out of 10 maybe. But there's something about it that is so undeniably 80s and so just fun about seeing Jason in Manhattan, even in that last 20 minutes. It's just so funny. And I would say the same about Halloween 5. Halloween 5 is, I don't love it, but it's not my least favorite in the franchise. There's worse for me.
Yeah, I could say. I think primarily, like I said, like around this time at the end of the 80s, it just got very, very cheesy from what I've seen in regards to how each franchise has taken their routes and making these movies. So,
but I do 100% agree with you. It was starting. It was definitely a sign that things were on the decline in terms of the quality of the storytelling. It was more about dollar bills and sequels than it really was about telling a quality story anymore. Mm-hmm. And that even kind of goes back into the whole splatterpunk thing too, where it's like it's just whack. It's nuts. It's. Do you think that this is crazy? This is crazy. This is crazy.
I was gonna say, do you think like that could have been the case because they were just trying to make like things more wacky and like that'd be like with the story, maybe. The kills, and like the visual effects, like the wackier the better is kind of the method that they wanted to do, and that goes with the story as well. So I wonder if that's what happened like when it came nearing the end of the 80s, because it was just like the more wackier we are, the more we stand out, and the more we'll gain popularity, whether that gets crushed by critics' reviews or the MPA's like, we're not doing that scene, or like I think you get more clout whenever you hear that Freddy this Freddy movie got hit with MPAA like hard. Like that kind of is
Right.
like, oh shit, that means this movie's gonna be really fucking like disturbing. So I want to watch it. You know what I mean?
Well, overall, I think, and you can find examples of this with the cast and the crew, with fans, with critic reviews. I think the fatigue was starting to set in a little bit, and the roller coaster, like I said before, the roller coaster had gone over the final hump, and everybody was like, "Hey, that was fun. That was cool." You know? And obviously, it still had its hardcore fan base, but we've said this before. It's important to remember that horror fans will always fill seats. Butts will always be in seats when it comes to horror fans. But the fatigue was with the general movie-going audience, and it's an interesting conversation because, like, was Dream Master really the peak of it all? Was Dream Warriors the peak? Where that line kind of peaks and falls is kind of up for debate. I would almost say at least with A Nightmare on Elm Street, it's here. And I think the box office numbers support that theory because it was a steady incline after the first one, and then we really dropped off. Once we dropped off, we really dropped off.
And I think it's mainly because they were trying to push so many narratives in regards to this movie. Because if you remember, like even after like the crazy, blue line sex scene and the graduation, you saw how they were like really trying to push us into this new crowd. Like after everything that happened and after everything that happened in the previous film, they all of a sudden, Alice has these new sets of friends, and the dad is like kind of okay, and they had that whole like
he's not an alcoholic anymore.
Yeah, they had that whole like group picture and try to force us to be like, oh, okay, these are the people we're going to care about, and yet like a quarter of them, like more than a quarter of them, were ever shown again in this movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like it's just like I feel like everything just kind of felt forced a little bit. So it's almost as like they try to force us to care about a lot of these characters, and it just leaves us, like not really having any emotion towards any of them. So
yeah,
I was like,
no, I'm here. All my stuff just fell behind me. I like backed into it because I was trying to scratch my foot.
I gotcha. But you hear what you got what I'm saying though, right?
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying. And critically, it had gotten really mixed reviews. Like, not only when you look at horror fans and you look at the cast and crew, everybody kind of feels like it fell a little flat. But part 4 didn't even have time to settle before they were shoving another chapter at people. I had found it rolling less than a year. Literally less than a year after it released, they were already shut. Robert Englund said this had like 4 or 5 weeks of pre-production, and then boom, they started. Like they started without an art director, they started without a director. Like they had zero idea what they were going to do. They were just like, "Here we go, let's roll. Part 5, let's do it. We'll do it live." But I had found a Rolling Stone article from 1988, and I wanted to read this. During the marketing of Elm Street 4, and I wanted to share because I thought it was interesting. In a new way, Freddy Krueger's newfound hipness isn't surprising. By embracing a monster as cool, funny, or even heroic, horror audiences also manage to render the fiend less frightening. For Englund, though, Freddy remains neither humorous nor heroic. After all, Englund says Freddy is a child killer, a kind of modern monster that we have seen and heard a lot in recent years. But in a way, he's a symbol of even something worse. Although I don't play abstracts as an actor, I think that what Freddy really stands for is the idea of killing the future. He has no place there, and so he is killing it. He is an envy of youth, and when teenagers see these movies, I'm sure that's what really freaks them out and scares them. Even though they may not intellectualize it, they understand that what's Freddy is truly stalking their future hopes. It's pretty deep from the man himself.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, that's kind of... What did he say? He said even the kids don't intellectually understand. I was like
they don't necessarily understand why. I don't think it was supposed to be backhanded. I just think I think it's an interesting quote.
Go ahead.
Go.
I was yawning hard, so you got it.
Whatever. I think what he's trying to say, he was also trying to fish for a reason to keep him scary. I think Robert Englund always wanted the character to be scary. He always took him seriously, I think, even when other people didn't. And I think he always took the story of Freddy seriously, even though he knew that, okay, this is starting to become a joke to people.
You're talking about Robert Englund or Wes Craven?
Robert Englund.
Okay.
But Wes Craven was so out of the picture at this point.
Oh, okay.
Like by the time Freddy's Dead rolled around, the only like how he found out that Freddy's Dead was happening was because he saw the poster on the side of a city bus, and he was like, oh, I guess they're gonna kill him. Like he was so far removed at this point. He was like, I don't even care.
Yeah, damn. I can't imagine with my own creation and stuff like that. But I mean, it's how Hollywood works. So,
but I think that's an interesting idea that he has about the killing the future thing. I don't. Again, I think that's more of a Robert Englund justifying the character more than it is a conscious choice from New Line. And you could almost argue it's the same kind of thing as the whole what people said about the woke stuff in Halloween, whatever. We're not going to get into that. But, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis saying that it's about trauma. It's all about trauma and the power of women and trauma. You know, that whole thing. Generational
by no
trauma.
means making fun of that.
It's like, I'm not making fun of it at all. But there were a lot of people that were like, does she really... Was that what they were trying to set out to do? Or is she saying that to justify coming back to this role again? You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know if that was necessary. What Robert Englund is saying here, I don't know if it was necessarily a conscious choice or if it was just kind of his way of bringing some intellectual quality to Freddy Krueger at this point.
You can't bring any intellectual quality into a movie that's written so terribly, if that makes sense, in regards to like how the story goes. And like, even though, yes, it does make sense in regards to the themes, like it's easy for someone to just say, like, after watching this movie, it's just like, okay, well, I can dissect it and be like, okay, this is pretty
I'm
much
listening. Give me just a minute.
It's just about Freddy Krueger, killing Hope. But I mean, can you really? I feel like that was just kind of like an afterthought, if it makes sense. It's like him justifying making, after going through so much production hell, like I can imagine like this is just his way of like justifying why it went so badly and so poorly. It's like we try to go a more intellectual route in regards to this, try to make them more serious, but in the grand scheme of things, it was just like, terribly produced, terribly rushed, and at the end of it all, like, only thing that I thoroughly enjoyed was just Freddy being Freddy at that point.
Yeah, I don't know how effective it was in making it scary again. I don't necessarily think it was. Even the ending, the script wasn't complete. They just kind of took the pieces from the various ideas and pieced them together into kind of a one thing. And as they were filming, they got to the end and they were like, "Oh crap, we got to end this thing somehow. Like what do we do?" And you can tell. I mean, you can tell because at least it may not. I mean, it's not an Academy Award winning story by any means, but like at least it feels like one cohesive thing. And then you hit a point in the movie, and it's about that last 15 or 20 minutes, and it's just like it's about at the point where Yvonne finds Freddy's mom, in the tower, and from that point on, it's just kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? Like this doesn't make any sense. Like what? The Jacob kid, when he like and like spits and stabs Freddy, like the tongue punch thing, like what are we doing here? Like I don't understand. It doesn't really make much sense.
Like tongue punches him like in the
he really does. It doesn't, like, what would you even call that? Like why his tongue? I don't know. But another thing that was pieced together that we haven't even talked about yet, speaking of Freddy, was the actual Freddy makeup. As we've talked about before, Robert Englund hated being in the makeup and all of the prosthetics, and Louis Lazara and Howard Berger, who were the makeup effects artists on Dreamchild, talked about wanting to refine the makeup to make Freddy's look a little bit more aged, which I don't think was very effective. But I'm not sure that they achieved that, and I think part of it was to make it easier for Robert Englund because, I mean, obviously that was a big issue for him.
Yeah.
And
the prosthetics of his face was pretty much the big issue. But then, like, you have the kid who pretty much like had like kind of similar, but I can see why they weren't
at the end.
As they weren't as like thorough with his
detailed
makeup at the end.
Right.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Well, but another thing, I understand trying to make it simpler for Robert Englund. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But they had mentioned wanting to make him look more aged and refined. But I don't necessarily think that worked because it just looks different. Not necessarily in the facial structure, but in the deepness of the burns and the griminess of it. Like, if you wanted to make the one that looks the most aged and decomposed and grimy is part 2, is Freddy's Revenge. Yeah. When he's got the witch nose and the ear, like it looks soaking wet and drippy and pussy and gross, and like there's like texture to it, and it looks really nasty in that film. So I don't necessarily think they achieved the weathered look in this one, because it didn't really look any more. It looked less weathered. It looked, if anything, I think it looked a little bit cleaner than some of the past films.
I was gonna say, because right now I'm seeing, like, I don't know, I'm just checking out all the different types of prosthetics that Robert Englund kind of went through, and I don't know, yeah, I can definitely see how, like, them trying to go easy on him with the makeup kind of didn't really help with their idea of trying to make him look older and more deteriorated. It just made it look more like, oh, he just put on a mask. Like, I would say, like, from this picture I'm seeing right now of, like, Freddy's dead. I think it was Freddy's dead. Because I don't really remember this gauntlet that he has, but yeah, I don't know. It just looks more cartoonish, if it makes sense. It doesn't look like it's meant to be anything that's like deteriorating. It just looks, kind of cartoonish.
Yeah. I'm trying to hang on. I'm gonna pull up side by sides because I want to.
Well, I'm pretty sure if you look up like Freddy's dead and compare it to, like, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, I mean, it's like night and day with how they look, honestly.
Yeah. So, okay. So here's Freddy in Elm Street 2. And it's my personal favorite look. I think he looks grimy and nasty and messed up, whatever, Here is Freddy in Elm Street 5. It just doesn't look as scary.
Well,
it doesn't
you gotta
look
understand, this is a photo. This right here is photo, right? This is like a photo shoot.
Right. Yes, I understand that too.
Obviously, it's just to make them look more commercial, I guess. That was what happened. Was that it ended up being like we lost like the horror serial killer Freddy, and we turned him into a commercial icon. And if you're going to turn him into a commercial icon, he needs to be more presented.
Yeah.
So that's why his makeup was much more cartoony and much more easier to see his face, his personality. Like, it wasn't like back then in 2, it was primarily just, he's burnt, demonic looking creature that just, is attacking kids. Yeah. And this one, this is like to entertain, not kids, but like, the younger generation.
Yeah.
So obviously his face had to be more shown. So that's why they didn't really,
even though they were trying to make him scarier, though.
Yeah, but it like, how do you make something more scarier when it's already kind of mainstream? If it makes sense, you know what I mean?
It couldn't have ever that wouldn't have ever worked or been effective because he was so mainstream at that point.
Yeah, like he was like, no one was particularly scared of him now at that point. It was just like, oh, what's Freddy gonna do now? Freddy,
it was
you dog.
It was more the novelty of like, oh, that's funny. Look at you go.
Look at you go, Freddy. Yeah. That was so funny that you did. I see what you did there. Yeah, kind of thing.
Well, so let's get into the actual plot and the kind of individual beats of the film. So again, we talked about this before. Starts with the really, really awkward, weird sex scene, blue sex scene between Alice and Dan, which is actually funny. That's actually not the dude who plays Dan. That's actually the dude who plays Super Freddy in the cartoon, when he's all bulked out with the lightning bolt with Alice.
That's
I was
my
like,
favorite scene.
That's kind of funny. I don't know if the guy didn't want to do it, but that guy on Never Sleep Again, he was like, they came to me and they were like, do you want to do a love scene? And he was like, sure. So that's actually him, his body that you see.
At that point, yeah.
Yeah. But one of the bigger plot points was, in Dream Master, we got the explanation that Amanda Krueger was a nun in an asylum and was raped by 1,000 maniacs. She accidentally got locked in there with them.
By the way, it was like a terrible asylum, I guess. Like, they're all just in one single shack, and they're like, all right, let's do our count. And out of all the jobs you have, your only job is to count, and you decide to cheapen out on it.
Well, and it's funny. I actually thought about this when I was rewatching it yesterday. So Alice and Dan have sex that night, and their high school graduation is the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you think about this, though, she goes and gets in the shower that night or morning, whatever, and the rules don't necessarily make a lot of sense because they literally just had sex like less than 12 hours ago. How would her baby be dreaming? Like, why is she suddenly dreaming about Amanda and she sees, how all of that went down?
I'm not going to delve into like when conception happens. I'm not when the baby comes about.
No, but that's not what I mean. But like that,
like you're
factually,
like how
that's not possible. Like,
I mean, yeah, sure, but I guess it was such an interesting thing of like how they changed the rules again.
Yeah,
because, like she was just just chilling in her bathtub, and all of a sudden she's drowning in her bathtub, and she automatically gets teleported into the asylum, where she ends up getting the glimpse of Amanda Krueger's.
Don't you love how much more continuously complicated this the rules became as they went on?
God,
like literally the first film, the rule Nancy beats him in the original film by turning her back to him because he can't feed off of her energy.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, that's it.
Freddy Krueger died because the vibes were off, pretty much.
Exactly.
That's literally how he died.
And then somehow now we're to the point where it's like he has to come through an unborn fetus in order to come to what? Yeah. They just it that didn't really make sense to me. But it's a cool sequence when she sees she sees we get the Robert Englund cameo when he's kind of walking around in with the maniacs and stuff like that, and he said that was actually really intense because they got a bunch of body performers and were basically just go have at it.
You're talking about in the asylum?
And yeah, in the asylum and all the
but then you also get
bumping into each other and spazzing out and being all weird.
I think this is one of the first scenes. Well, no, in 2 you actually see him too, but you actually get screen time of the actual Robert Englund just staring at the camera, darting at the camera and everything, and it's just really eerie. I enjoyed that a lot because it's just the vibes were scary. It wasn't perpetually setting up for a jump scare that's going to happen at any corner.
Yeah, it's just a creep me atmosphere.
It was just a creep me out kind of creep me out atmosphere where I just felt oh shit, I don't know which one's going to do it, but and then you see Robert Englund, it's oh, here he is. You know who he is now at this point. So
I will say that the gothic asylum stuff was pretty cool. I did enjoy that. It legitimately did have a creepy feeling or creepy vibe to it.
It's a more dark, gothy Tim Burton is kind of asylum, if it's fair to establish that, yeah. So
and it's cool because when she wakes up from that dream, before we cut to the graduation stuff and we get introduced to the characters and get reintroduced to her father and all that stuff, she wakes up from the dream and she's and she thinks it's going to be Dan next to her, and she he's like, Alice, are you okay? And it's Robert Englund, and he grabs her and shakes her or whatever, and then she really wakes up from the dream, and it's that's pretty cool. That's sick. It was kind of cool to see him in that little cameo moment. And I'm sure he loved getting to act without any Freddy makeup on.
Exactly. I was going to say, I was like, I'm sure he enjoyed that one scene where
he read that in the script and he was like, thank God. Yeah.
They said, well, I'm pretty sure how the production thing works. I'm sure that was one of the very first scenes he ended up doing, if the last one. Because if that was the case, I could
probably
imagine, producers are and directors are Fred, Robert, I need you to come back. Okay, we got to film one more dream sequence. And Robert's can I just not have the makeup? And that's pretty much how they made it work. It's okay, fine. I mean, it works for us. So so I could see it.
It's funny because we cut right back into another dream sequence right after the graduation because nothing major happens other than her telling Dan that she had the Freddy dream, and he kind of does the Nancy thing where he's if you don't worry about it, he can't get you. You're not giving him any energy. What does it matter, And he kind of blows it off and he's oh, we're going to have a good time. The summer's going to be awesome. We're going to go to Paris, yada, 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 yada. But we cut right back into
Paris after high school.
I know. we cut right back to another dream sequence where she starts running through the woods and she sees the kids in the park doing the 1, 2, Freddy's coming, blah, 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 blah. And that's when we finally see the exterior of the gothic Tim Burton-esque asylum. And obviously she gets in there. They wheel Amanda into the operating room, and they're like, the baby's breech, and there's all that stuff, and she's watching, and of course she's watching Amanda give birth to Freddy in the asylum. And it's funny, I don't know why they chose to do this. I guess it was just for the dream purposes, but she gives birth to the little gross demon Freddy that's like it's like in Alien when the chest burster scene, when it comes out and, like,
demon,
slithers across the floor. It's that kind of thing. And they're when the doctor takes him out and he's like and she's like, let me see. And the nurse goes, that is no child of God, or whatever else, the other nun and stuff like that. And
Jesus, can you imagine saying that?
It's funny, yeah.
Oh my God, that is a nightmare to hear. But
he even has a weird resurrection too, because like Alice chases the little like that little weird fat faced demon Freddy through the hallways and whatever, and she gets into the cathedral where he died in part 4 during the whole her whole little kung fu fighting moment, like, where she gets everybody's powers and whatever else. Stupid. But
this is where it fell off.
Yeah, it really did. The ending of I've always had a problem with the end. It's always the endings of these films that I have a problem with when it comes to Elm Street. But we get back into that same cathedral thing, and it slithers over to the thing, and stuff starts to happen, and Freddy's resurrected. And of course,
it's like the Slenderman like kind of thing that he had. He had like the elongated arm. I didn't really understand why that had to happen.
I didn't really get that either. But they, of course, Freddy's resurrected. He comes back, and of course, again, the themes of like the childbirth thing. He's it's a boy, all that thing when he's standing there, and she has the classic line where she says, What'd she say? She says something like, you can't come back. I locked the door on you a long time ago. And he comes around the corner and he goes, but I found the key, and stuff like that. And of course we get it's one of my favorite
Freddy lines they were getting.
Yeah, the little one-liners, right? It's one of my favorite moments in the film, because that's when Amanda, the doors kick open and it's Amanda standing there. It's Freddy's mom. And she does her whole monologue. Freddy goes like, he's looked like her and Freddy kind of have this stare down moment, and she's, your birth was a curse on humanity. I won't let this happen again, or whatever. And Freddy looks dead into his mom's eyeballs and goes, we'll see, bitch. We'll see. And steps away.
It's like Freddy has 0 morals when that, because how like Jason, is following mama's directions.
Oh yeah, Freddy can't stand his mom.
Yeah. But like here, you just see Freddy, and he's just like, he's verbally assaulting his mother there. Like,
we'll see, bitch. We'll see.
I don't know. Like I feel like Freddy is just so unhinged now at this point. Like he has there's no morals he will not cross, no lines he will not cross.
Well, and of course the next kind of big piece of the film is Dan's death, which we kind of touched on briefly before. After Alice calls, she tells Dan that Freddy's back. Freddy, and they're at the pool, and Dan's like, okay, I gotta get to Alice. So he takes his bottle of champagne and whatever else, and he hops in his truck. And that's when things start to go weird. He's falling asleep while he's driving, and he starts to hear his mom yelling with Freddy on the radio, and weird stuff starts to happen with the car. And he looks over, and Freddy's sitting in the passenger seat, and that's when we get the chaotic whack Freddy, which I don't know. There's something when he takes the champagne bottle and he's like, and he goes, and just spits it all over the like dashboard and whatever, and he just goes, what does he say? He goes, that was a bad batch, Dan.
Yeah.
Something like, it's just so funny. And then he rips his own arm off and like stuffs it on the side of the car, like just weird. Like he's just nuts in that scene, and I love it. But Dan is he's ejected from the car once it crashes, and that's when he's running, and he's like he goes and he steals a motorcycle, which is not good, but he steals it, and that's where we get this
scene is
weird.
Where we get like, I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah.
like this scene right here when it came to the bike, I mean, oof, like become one with the vehicle.
Now, this one specifically, they had said that they the makeup effects artists were like, there was like 70% of that that we didn't even get to use because the MPAA cut it all. Like we had to keep, that was a major point where they were like, you're not going to get an R rating unless you cut this down, that death scene, because they had stuff like, there was test footage of them where the wires like go and they enter through his like knuckles and go, and the skin is like shredding back on his arms and stuff like that. They were going to have like the fuel injectors like stuff into his calf muscles and things like that and like go up through his body. Like it was nuts.
Well, if you look at how the costume is, it's gnarly. It's a gnarly ass fucking costume.
It's pretty cool.
They did for
it's
him.
Actually kind of scary looking, honestly.
It really does.
It's pretty nuts.
At night, whenever you see that thing barreling down, like in the scene where he's like driving and it's like he's fully the bike, like it's pretty fucking freaky.
Well, and I love the one-liners. I love it because he looks down and it's Freddy's face in with like the buttons and stuff, and he
the wires,
yeah, he just calmly he goes, "This boy feels the need for speed."
Like,
and stuff like that. And then when he loses control of his hands because his hands are like attached to the bike and he can't do anything, and you hear Freddy go, "Fuel injection" and stuff like that as he's like riding around. It's just so funny, man. But it was a dark death scene, and especially even when he crashes and he crashes into the truck and whatever else, and the guy runs out who is dressed like Freddy. He's got the fedora, he's got a red sweater on, and he's like, I didn't see him coming, I didn't mean it, whatever, all this stuff. And he looks at Alice and he's dead. Dan is laying there mutilated and dead, and he lifts up and he goes, "Hi, Alice, want to make babies?" And then he dies again, and she passes out or whatever. Like it's so that's a cool sequence, and even the way that it moves into the next.
I mean,
sequence.
what a great first death scene, I guess, if that makes sense. Like it's a great start.
It's a good one.
It's just saying like, dog, Freddy's here to have some fun now at this point. So
it's a good one. I've always really liked that death scene. But of course, this is where we get into the big plot point, because in that transition to the next piece of this is where, after Dan's death, they've taken Alice to the clinic and she's talking to the doctor. Dan's dumb parents are in the background, like playing the victim card thing, which I know their son just died. I'm not saying that's a victim card.
But I said, there's a lot happening right now.
There is a lot happening, but they're not very cool about it at all. But this is where we find out that Alice is pregnant, and it's so funny because Yvonne looks at her and she's like, "Tell me what's wrong?" And her doctor and Yvonne and her dad are standing there, and Yvonne just goes, "You're just a little pregnant." It's like, that is the worst way to tell somebody that they're pregnant. Like, "You're just a little bit pregnant."
Yeah.
What the fuck? What? Why would you say that? Gory Tiger, what's going on, man? What's up?
Hey,
Happy
Fran.
Sunday, man.
I hope you enjoy talking about this one, because we're having a lot of fun with this.
Well, and then we get into another dream sequence. Again, the dream sequences are just kind of like boom, boom, boom. We just kind of snap into them, and it's where we're interested We're interested in Jacob. Find me on Twitch. No, I'm kidding. We're interested.
Interested.
No, not interested. We're introduced. That's the word I was trying to go for.
See, he was saying
again.
that so
I haven't
bad,
been drinking, and
him.
I'm on I can't do it. It's okay. We're introduced to Jacob, which is the little kid who visits Alice in her hospital room. And he's kind of this weird, lifeless kid, very mysterious, very obvious that she's in a dream. And there's a little bit of a back and forth between the two of them. Light introduction to him. We have some more character development moments. Alice explaining the whole Freddy situation to her friends, which is kind of like, okay, there could have been a better way to do that, but whatever.
Yeah, it's like as soon as you're friends with Alice, it's like, you better get ready because you're about to be orientated into the world of Freddy, if that makes sense.
But, we get introduced to Greta's sad, like, forced perfectionist life kind of thing, which I always kind of felt bad for Greta. I'm going to be real. I did. Her character isn't in the movie for long, but we see just enough of her life to be like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Like, to have the parents that are just like, you're going to be a princess one day, like kind of like BS, you know. You can tell she's not happy. But we also, again, like we talked about before, we find out that Alice's dad is a genuinely good guy, and of course he was kind of an alcoholic in the original one. Her brother died in part 4 at the hand of Freddy, and he's a good dude who's trying to encourage his little girl. He's trying to make the best of a bad situation. Like when they're in the kitchen, he's kind of joking with her, and he's, you know, he says something like, it'll be good to hear a little boy's footsteps around the house or whatever. Like he hopes it's a boy, all that stuff, you know. But then we get to the other piece that was super cut down by the MPAA, which is the dinner party where Greta's parents are forcing her to socialize and be all fake and prissy and, you know, eat. And she even says at one point, she's like, you know, they're talking to Greta, and she's like, you know, my best friend, or like one of my best friends died yesterday, Mom. Like, you know, like what, you know, like all that stuff, and she's like, eat your dinner, dear, and all that stuff, you know, isn't that nice? And she's trying to be, you know, super fake.
Yeah, I think with this scene right here is pretty freaking hard to watch, because, like, you know, it's someone that's like, it's like already like she's a victim just from her parents, and then Freddy just has to cap it off with how she ends up in her dying dream, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah.
But it, you know, it's just it's a small glimpse into her world, but it's still a sad thing, and I think it makes it all the more sad. It's almost Freddy stuffing her mouth in that bon appetit, bitch. That's almost like more of a metaphor for like her parents just trying to like make her perfect and stuff her with BS, you know what I mean, instead of just letting her just live her life, you know.
I thought it was just her, because I thought the parents were trying to make sure she watches her weight, so Freddy was just trying to like stuff her face.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what was going on.
Well, and I think it meant multiple things, but I've always felt bad for her. I mean, her death always kind of bothered me. Plus, Freddy's always calling people bitches in these later installments. Like,
I know.
It's just kind of his thing, you know. No. Did you just cut out for a minute?
Yeah, I put on mute because I'm trying to call my dog. My dog's doing something dumb.
Oh, okay. I was like, it sounded weird. It sounded like it cut out, and then.
Oh no, you're good. I was gonna say, like, definitely, like, Freddy Krueger's one. Like, if you had to do like a count on that for specific word, I feel like Freddy's got a lot of people beat in regards to movie.
Yeah.
In regards to like movie characters.
Oh well, yeah.
He's got it beat. Like always, every single scene he's in, it's saying that word. So.
Yeah. Well, we also get asked an interesting question about halfway through the film when we're in Mark's warehouse, and you know, we're surrounded by his cartoons and his comic drawings, and Alice is wondering how, obviously Yvonne is still skeptical of the entire thing, and Alice is wondering how Freddy is getting into her dreams and how he's using her dreams if she's awake. Like, how is he getting to her friends through Alice if she's awake? And of course,
and I still feel like that question's never answered properly.
Well, it is in the ultrasound moment. And that's when Alice and Mark enter through Nancy. You know, Yvonne leaves at this point. She leaves Mark's whole place, and Alice is, she's still there with Mark, and she looks over at one of his drawings, and it's very Aha's Take on Me music video where Patrick Swayze is like in the grocery store and he's going in and out of the cartoon world thing. She looks down and Mark is in one of his cartoons, and she's like, no, he's dreaming or whatever. And that's when she enters. They enter through Nancy's old house, through the whole 1428 boarded up green shutters Elm Street house, and they get separated. Jacob is there. Jacob has a really creepy line in that moment because he looks at her and he's like, she was like, he talks to me. I just dropped my water, whatever. He's like, he talks to me and stuff like that, and she's like, who talks to you? And she's like, my friend with the weird hand and stuff like that. Like, that's just, it's kind of creepy. It's cool. Yeah. It's pretty creepy. It's neat. But of course they get separated, and Jake, you know, there's a little bit of that explanation, and then she goes to her ultrasound. And the doctor is explaining that, you know, unborn babies can spend up to 70% of each day in a dreamlike state. She realizes that Freddy is accessing her and her friends through the dreams of the unborn baby. And Sarah Risher had actually explained that this sequence was their way of explaining that Freddy is using her friend's souls to grow the baby and to give him strength and to come back. It's kind of dumb because they didn't really explain it very well.
So using the souls of Alice's friends to form this baby to turn into Freddy again, like alive.
Yeah, because you see that moment where what happens exactly? I forget how. I think it's just during the ultrasound. She's looking at the heartbeat because he says, "Let's listen to the heartbeat" or something like that, and she's listening to the ultrasound. She's listening to the heartbeat. She's watching it, and she almost like we see the graphics are not very good, but we see the baby like inside of her uterus, and it pans over, and Freddy is like the placenta, like his face like attached to the inside of her uterus. It's weird, yeah. And he says something like you see their souls being like sucked into the baby, and it's kind of stupid. Like that's another piece of it that I'm like, I could have gone without seeing that. Like like you almost would have said more if you wouldn't have shown that, rather than trying to include that and make it. That's just awkward and weird at that point. Like it just doesn't. I don't think it did it any justice that being in the film.
But you felt like it just felt kind of rushed or
it didn't feel very thought out.
Yeah.
It just kind of felt like, oh crap, we got to do something. Here we go. We'll do this.
You got to explain how Freddy's going to come back because kind of thing. Yeah, I get that.
It's very odd, but that's when we're introduced to Dan's parents at Alice's dad's house, and obviously she's arguing with Yvonne. They come downstairs and they start pressing her for information. They want to know what she plans to do with the baby, and they tell her that they want him for themselves after they got a call from the doctor, which is a huge break in confidentiality.
Yeah.
Just saying, my
HIPAA
friend.
laws.
Yeah, that HIPAA law has been broken. And they were like, Dr. Moore told us that she was hysterical and all this stuff, and they want him for themselves and everything. And and it's like they don't even try to let her explain herself. They're just like, the courts will disagree with you, like all this stuff, and then they leave, and I'm like, shut up. You guys are the biggest like Karen people I've ever seen in my life. Like, stop being a douche and
okay,
let
you say that.
Live.
You say that, but then look what's going on right now.
No, there is a lot going on, and she is kind of showing signs of having issues,
of having hysteria, like of having real hysteria. So,
well, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's kind of like I really don't want them to win, but I can kind of see their point of view, like kind of thing. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, and
it's
here's where
Alice, figure your shit out quick because you're gonna lose. Yeah,
right. At this point, this is where things start to fall apart a little bit for me. Alice goes into Dreamland. She's looking for Amanda, and Yvonne enters through the pool. Obviously Yvonne goes back to the pool. She's kind of had the argument with Alice, and she's swimming. Alice is looking for Amanda. She ends up in water, which of course you get the kind of cool sequence where Yvonne climbs up the high dive, and she's standing on the diving board, and Freddy's hand comes over and like it's starting to crack, and she jumps. Well, Alice walks in and she sees Freddy standing there. Freddy just kind of like emerges from the water, and he says something smart, as Freddy does. And then she says something else, and he pulls Yvonne's head up from underneath the water, and she's gasping for air and stuff. And it's like, that's kind of cool. That was a pretty cool introduction to him. Like, to see, if you're going to run into Freddy in the dream world, having him lift up out of the water and then him pulling Yvonne up out of the water is kind of a cool introduction to him.
Kind of like a shark kind of interaction, if that makes sense. Like shark attack kind of thing.
But this is where we get to one of the craziest sequences in the entire franchise. Again, very Take on Me with Patrick Swayze. Mark falls asleep and enters his black and white comic book dream in the warehouse, and it's cool. I gotta say, it's a cool effect because he's in color, but the world around him is not. And that's actually kind of a cool contrast, and it doesn't look terrible, but
no, it actually mixes well with
it does. It looks pretty decently,
with the way the era is. And we get to see like Super Freddy like come into play, which is like probably one of my favorite iterations of Freddy. Honestly.
Well, and we get the chase scene through the black and white warehouse where Freddy's on the skateboard and he's taunting him with Greta, which of course makes him angry, and Mark becomes the Prowler, which is the character he talked about before. There was a line towards the beginning of the movie when they first got to the warehouse, and he's talking to Alice, and he's like, the Prowler wouldn't be afraid to tell Greta how he felt and to stand up to Freddy and all this stuff. It's one of the most bizarre sequences in the entire franchise when he turns around and he says, "Time to die, you scar-faced limp dick," and it's like, what? What? How did we get here? What is going on?
Well, I mean, you gotta be honest. Like at this point, you kind of just root for the guy because he's like, "Oh shit!" Like, It's kind of like that Dream Warriors kind of thing. I was like, "Yeah, it does. Use your dream superpowers, quote unquote."
Right.
Win,
yeah, I guess that is kind of a way of keeping the slight Dream Warriors angle in there. Like you gotta throw it in there somewhere to make it make sense.
Yeah.
But it's his destiny is kind of cool in the way it takes place because it doesn't necessarily. It only shows a little bit of what actually happens in the real world. Because after the Super Freddy moment, when he starts, there's that like tiny little fight scene between the Prowler and Super Freddy. Freddy slashes him, and the camera pulls back, and you see he's like paper. It's like Freddy slashing through paper. But of course, when Alice finally looks at Mark, his body is just mutilated and shredded. Like, obviously we only saw Freddy tearing up paper, but you could only imagine what was happening to his body, in that moment, because he's under a pile of stuff. It's a cool scene, and it's a pretty cool sequence as well. But this is where the ending falls apart for me. And it was because they didn't have an ending. It was just kind of slopped together. And Alice and Yvonne have figured out that they have to get to Amanda. Yvonne finds Amanda. Alice attacks Freddy and confronts him, throws him in with 1,000 maniacs. Maybe they raped him. Who knows? But that didn't last long either because he comes right back. They kind of rip him apart. They rip off his arm, all that stuff. And, she runs in the other room. That's what I was talking about. We get the awful spider sequence, too. The CGI spiders that just look terrible when they throw his arm or whatever. But she runs literally in the other room, and he's like, "Didn't last long, did it, bitch?" or something like that. Like he says something, smart again. And this time, Jacob is standing there. So we're also seeing Jacob standing there with Freddy at this point. And, there's a little bit of a back and forth between the two of them. And Alice says, "Jacob, you don't have to listen to him," or whatever. And she's like, "Run." And Alice and Jacob run in different directions. And this is where we get the Freddy chasing them through the weird trippy staircases that go up and down. And this is what I was talking about before, where what is this supposed to be? Like, I understand that I understand that.
Is this where they kind of wanted the dream purgatory kind of thing?
I don't know. No. Because that was a different idea entirely. But it's almost like it's like an Aztec ruins type thing mixed with like a Gothic cathedral. It's so weird, and it just it works, but it almost doesn't seem thought out. Like it seems like there could have been a cooler setting for this final thing. If you want to do the staircase thing, that's fine. But I don't know why it's like this big Gothic room with like a drop off. It's odd. It doesn't really make sense to me. But what does make sense to me is that Jada's in the house. What's going on, buddy? He said, "Who is this?" Freddy Krueger. That's who this is. That's who it is. But yeah, it's a very odd like setting for this big final fight scene. But
yeah, I guess. But like when you're looking for something like climactic, like you kind of have to have that. So I mean, that was just one of the
something odd.
Just something like something like out of the ordinary, I guess, because it seems like it fits.
But you could have just stuck with the whole like asylum thing was creepy enough. I don't know why it went to this weird. Like she walks in another room and there's different staircases going up and down and there's Aztecs and there's like the candied glass and like it's just like what what is this? It doesn't aesthetically and visually it doesn't really make much sense, but again the entire ending doesn't make much sense. That's kind of the idea. The ending itself makes zero sense at all anyways.
At this point we're trying to like justify something that we don't even understand right now.
Like I feel like they were like do that, we'll do this, and then you're gonna run in here and you're gonna hit him with your tongue, and the kid was probably like I'm gonna what? I'm gonna hit him with my tongue. They're like, yep, your tongue is gonna become long and it's gonna stab him, and that's how he's gonna die. And it's like, oh.
Like,
Okay.
baby has superpowers now.
Yeah, like it doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously Yvonne finds Amanda at this point, and after Yvonne finds Amanda, this is when Amanda shows up, and Freddy emerges and splits from Alice, which is a really gross sequence. The effects guys actually did a pretty bang up job on this. He's being born through her, I guess, is kind of the idea behind it, and
not from her fetus.
Yes, it's very, again, it's odd. It doesn't make sense. It's like you've spent the entire movie saying he's being born again through her fetus, but then he's born again through her.
I think they didn't want to. I think they just did not want to like continue with that at that point. They're like I think
what?
This is a little harsh, or maybe it could just be the MPAA just like we're not doing that. You know what I mean?
But this was way prior to the MPAA. This was filming wise. Like why? What? Like I don't understand what their thought process was. But I don't know if they really had that much of a thought process for it, or if it was just like this works. you know.
Yeah.
But this is when Amanda shows up, and she says Jacob now, and Jacob kind of pulls a trick-a-do on him, because we see Jacob and he's kind of got the slight burns and stuff, and he's like, teach me how to do it.
Teach me.
I want to learn and stuff like that, and that's when Amanda goes, Jacob now.
Can you imagine like a child Freddy? I probably would have gotten annoyed.
That'd be pretty creepy.
It'd be creepy, but I would be annoyed by it.
It would be kind of annoying.
You would have the personality of Freddy Krueger, but as a child, and it's like, ugh.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
But I mean, like, Homeboy is literally standing there, and the kid just goes, and just like stabs him, and that's when the souls are released and whatever else into it's so strange.
Where do souls go anyways? Like,
I don't know. But like, what? And then to top it off, Jacob, like, he literally tongue punches him, stabs him with his tongue, and the souls are released. And the kid goes, "School's out, Krueger," and it's like, what?
School's out, Krueger. Yeah.
School's out, Krueger. It's like,
yeah.
What the hell? What does that mean?
Look, the kid wanted a cheesy one-liner. You're gonna dock him for that?
But at least make it make sense in the scene. Make it make sense. Like, it's so weird. Jada said, trying to explain the logic of Dream Child is the true nightmare.
My God.
For real.
That's
at least
funny,
when it comes to the last 20 minutes, because it's like, okay, we're doing, like, they were doing semi-okay for the first little bit, and then we get to that last 15 minutes, and it's like, oh, okay. Like, we're gonna go there. Or not go there, because it doesn't make any sense at all. So it's a very strange ending to a film, and then it almost feels like we just kind of like, got to slap the bow on there, because after that we just immediately cut to Alice and Yvonne and her dad with the baby in the park, and they're she kisses him and whatever, and then the camera pans away and we see the kids singing the Freddy rhyme, and then that's it. And it's like, oh,
so he's not dead. Yeah, kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
It was like,
cool.
Not even a tongue punch from a child it can kill Freddy.
Yeah,
who would have thought?
It's a very, very odd ending to a film. It's just kind of, it's one of those things where it's like you had a decent thing going, and then you just decided to, like, it's like when you watch a recipe video, and then suddenly the recipe just gets like insanely weird at the end, and
it's like, then flip it upside down and add 2 teaspoons of cumin, and just like, you don't know where that's going. Yeah,
you're making lasagna, then suddenly you're like, and we're gonna add 2 tablespoons of vanilla ice cream on top. It's like, all right, there it is. It's weird. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not a bad film. Definitely doesn't live up to the earlier ones, but I will say I have been shocked going back and revisiting, going through the Elm Street films. I've been shocked at how much I've enjoyed them, because I always kind of had this idea, at least from what I remembered, that after Elm Street 3, they were just hot, steaming piles of garbage. And I've actually had a good time watching 4 and 5. So I don't know if 6 is going to be that way. It hasn't been super long since I watched 6. It's been a few years. It had been a few years since I actually watched all of them sequentially. I did it right before COVID happened. Like one summer, I watched all of them. But
all of the Freddys?
All of the Freddys, yeah. I sat and rewatched them all. But I don't know. Freddy's Dead is a very interesting piece of this too, because it's like they knew they had to end it. They knew they were running out of ideas at that point. This is kind of the in question moment. 1 through 4 is like, oh, this is hot. People are digging this. Part 5 is like, oh, we're starting to question if people are digging this. And then part 6 is like, people are not digging this anymore. You know what I mean? Part 6 was like it's funny because Bob Shea in Never Sleep Again, he's like, we knew that we had run out of ideas. Like it was just like, we got to end this thing. We got to do it. Yeah.
That's funny.
So, and of course, that's when Sarah Risher was like, we'll call it Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. That way people know this is it. Freddy's done. He's not coming back. That's it. And to be fair,
just from the title alone, not from the fact of the story. So,
to be fair, that was essentially true, because then you had Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was its own strange bag of tea from, like the Aztec ruins, but then you also had the remake, which is kind of its own burnt squirrel, nasty CGI Freddy mess.
Burnt
so
black
it's
sheep,
it's so I don't know. We're kind of at an interesting point in the franchise, so I'll be interested to see kind of what I think of part 6 going back into it this time and kind of taking another deep dive into it. But already started working on that, so we will be back with part 6 within the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
I'd say, yeah.
Make our way. We're only got 3 more Elm Streets left.
With Elm Street. So close.
Well, this one, it's also taken us a long time to get through this because the last few months have been very strange. I've had a kid. Miguel was on a break. It's been a weird couple of months, which is why it's taken us so long to do another episode of Purely and Simply Evil. But also, we had Oktoberfest in there because Halloween Ends had come out, and then it was like the holiday season, and it was just, there was a lot happening. So that's why we we did the first 4 Elm Streets, and then we kind of took a break, and now here we are, and we're going to do the back half. So it was like half, do a bunch of other stuff in between. Now we're going to do the back half. But hopefully the goal, at least, is to stay a little bit more on top of Purely and Simply Evil going at least through the rest of the year, because this is a fun show. I like doing
it seems like you guys are liking this, so I think it's something we should definitely continue to do.
It is, and I enjoy it. I enjoy part of the reasoning behind doing it this way was because when we came up with this show, we were like, we didn't want to just do reviews again, standard 10-minute reviews on YouTube, because it's like that's been done a million times. So I was like, let's take just let's climb inside of these sequels and stay a little while and
let's climb into the uterus of the plot and fucking
we'll climb into the uterus of all these deep horror sequels, and it's been fun. So, and I'm looking forward to what we're doing next. We've talked about this before. We really want to dive deep into the whole zombie subgenre at some point, because that's.
We're gonna keep teasing until we eventually do it. So just be ready.
We do, and I know we got to get in Friday the 13th too. Listen, I've said this before. We have got so many seasons of this show planned out.
Yeah, we do.
The other show with Let's Talk Movies and Classic Revisited, it's a little bit. There's a little bit more ambiguous nature and leniency to it, because it's like we never know what movie news is going to come out. We never know necessarily week to week what we're going to talk about. We have ideas and we have things we want to do, especially for Classics Revisited. But this show, at least, it's like there is an endless possibility of films that we could talk about in the horror genre on this show.
Of horror that we can go through.
And much of our audience are horror people, so it's awesome.
And we appreciate all of you.
We do.
Tremendously.
So speaking of, be sure, if you have not already, leave this episode a like. 3 people watching at the moment. We had a couple more earlier. About an hour and 23 minutes in. I think that's pretty much going to do it for us for this episode of Purely and Simply Evil, talking Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, The Dream Child. This, again, man, I've enjoyed revisiting this franchise a little bit more than I actually thought I would, at least for the other sequels. And I've always loved Elm Street. I've always really enjoyed them. But again, these older sequels have just, they did not, I didn't have a very good
hype, I guess.
memory. Well, I didn't have a good memory of them, but going back and rewatching them, I'm like, this is actually, like, they're not that bad. Like, at least 4 and 5 are not that bad. I've kind of enjoyed watching 4 and 5 a little bit more than I've enjoyed watching Dream Warriors. I'm going to be real. Dream Warriors has,
and that's pretty much a hot topic right there.
And we'll rank the franchise when we're done, just exactly like what we did with Halloween. But Dream Warriors has actually very much dropped on my list in terms of enjoyment.
It's a bold statement too.
It's a bold statement, but it has. It's a very chaotic movie, and there's, again, it's a common theme with Elm Street. Too much story for one thing. There was too much going on, trying to do too many different ideas, too much extra stuff. So, but guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us. This has been episode number 23 of Purely and Simply Evil. We will be back. We'll let you know when. Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at LTM Podcast KY with A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 6. Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare. That is a hell of a title right there. Okay. So it's going to be exciting, guys. New episodes of our shows premiere every single week at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at LTM Podcast KY. If you're going to tweet at us, please use please use the hashtag Let's Talk Movies Podcast. Guys, we love you. As always, be good to each other. Have an incredible start to your week, and we will see you soon. Peace.
Peace.